Okay, well, good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and call the special call meeting of the Jackson City Council, May 21st, 2019, to order, and ask, if you will, please rise, and I'll listen to the invocation pledge. Father, we come before you this morning just thanking you for being the great God that you are, a God of all, God of mercy, God of grace. Father, we thank you and praise you for that. We thank you for members of this council who have served you so well. Father, you appointed them to this position. Father, we would pray that you would give them wisdom and discernment as we handle the business which comes before us today. Father, we thank you again. We're just here to proclaim you as our Lord, our God, and our King, and to acknowledge your divine sovereignty in our life. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you, Council, for getting our budget underway, much to the dismay of the mayor, much to the credit of the comptroller who asked us to do it, and we're going to try to abide by the wishes of the comptroller. We need to keep him as our friend. Anita, you can show, I think, on roll call, all members of the council present, and item 4 is the invitation for public comment, and encourage anyone here that wants to be heard on any item under new business to let me know, and I'll be happy to call on you. New business on the first readings, item 6, we have an ordinance to establish the FY July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020, operating and capital budget of the city of Jackson, Tennessee. Mr. Al?
Okay, did you make any opening remarks, Mayor, other than what you've already said? Or?
Well, I think bottom line is that we felt all along that we could go ahead and pass a resolution for a continuation of our budget into next year. That is allowed by Tennessee Code Annotated. We have it in black and white, and we have a copy of that if you would like to see it. However, the comptroller viewed that statute a little bit different than we did, and we're going to abide by the wishes of the comptroller and go ahead and adopt the budget for next year. Basically, what you'll have in front of you, and what Al will tell you, basically we're going to present the same budget as we just finished, or will finish up the end of June, with about three differences in it, and Al will go over those differences for you. But I think everyone this past year, all our department heads and the funding we had was adequate, and I think you all see that as the budget nears the end. At the end of June, many of our departments are under budget. For this year, I'm not for sure how long they'll stay there. We still got about a month left. But right now, many of them are under budget. So we felt like we had adequate funding to fund our city government this year. So that budget will be going into next year, along with about 3 or 4 different changes. Now I'll leave it up to you.
Okay, taking off from where the mayor left off, what he was referring to, and I think you have a copy of 6-56-210, which does allow for a continuation budget. But when we finally got something in writing from MTAS, from Alyssa Hodge, who is their attorney, she quoted that, but then she came up with a disclaimer here at the bottom, which basically says that our city attorney should contact the comptroller's office and appeal the decision that the comptroller had already made. Lewis did not feel comfortable in doing that because he's not been associated with the budget. So I took that and that action item, I called the comptroller's office, and they explained that this was intended for to be used when there's tornadoes, floods, acts of God, etc., not just handing off from one administration to another. So that's why we're here today. We don't have with us the departmental heads because they didn't really get time to do what they would normally do, to put in their new hires, their progressions, etc. I have put together a budget based on the information available to me and highlighting, which I will later, the basic changes, because I think that's our obligation to the new council, of which 5 of you will be staying on, I believe, and to the citizens of our city. So I've put together a budget here that shows 74 million in revenue. And the first thing you're gonna notice is that we normally have a 3 to 4% increase, 2.5 to 3% increase in revenue. And this time it's only 0.12. And that's not even 1%. And I'll explain why basically. But still, by being able to adjust some of the other expenses, we come up with a 506,859.86 positive number. Now, this is not as accurate as it would normally be because the departments have not had their input, but it's the best we could do at the time. So this is the budget ordinance that we will be presenting. Following the state law, I did a public notice, which basically has those same numbers on it that I just showed you, plus the other funds and the tax rate, which we, if you pass this, will maintain, will retain the same 1.9619. So that was the first step that I did. I showed you a copy of the ordinance, which we'll come back to. And I'd like to go through a couple of things. This is the second ordinance, like I said, that shows the maintaining of the 1.9619. So that'll be the second item that we'll vote on. But one of the things that the comptroller's office wanted me to stress, or whomever, is our revenues and what is happening to our debt, what is our obligation, because, I mean, I can't imagine a municipality that wouldn't have debt, but it was said to me that one of the reasons why we have to do a budget, and it has to be a balanced budget, is because we have to make our citizens aware of our debt, which in this case is $9,705,000 debt service for this year. And the way that we're going to fund that is every tax dollar, you remember these pie charts from years in the past, every tax dollar is divided up. This is the first step, 23.5% has to go to debt service. Now, the problem is that in previous years, and it's not only the property tax, it's tax in lieu of, other things of that nature that get divided. This year, we're only going up $323,000 of the pot to split. Normally, we'd be going up $1.5 million or something of that magnitude. You can see last year, we had 23.09% going to debt service. So the amount going to debt service is increasing each year, and I'll explain that. The good thing is that we've been able to cut out a slice here for Scott Chandler and his resurfacing. This is the first year, FY19, which we're in now, that we were able to take every dollar of tax that came in and tax in lieu of. We were able to take 3.62% and give to Scott for resurfacing of roads, in addition to his borrowed funds.
Al, if I may, can I jump in with a
Yes.
question or two?
Anytime.
I'm sorry. First of all, back to the MTAS letter from the attorney.
Yes.
Did you share that with us?
No, because I believe the mayor gave each one of you a copy of that code 56-6-210, but I can make sure I've got Sharon, my assistant, jokingly, who is going to make a note. Anytime any one of you asks for a copy,
Okay.
she will make sure you get it.
Yeah, I sure would like a copy of her response.
In other words, this from MTAS was saying, yes, that is right, but here's our disclaimer.
Sure. Mm-hmm. I just
So
like
they
that.
read a lot into it that we did not read.
Right, I
Not
just
in
like
black and
that on
white.
the record. And secondly, now we're to the pie chart and
Yes.
the debt service. We do have a cap on that, correct? On the percent to debt service? Is
We-
it, there's a,
Oh, yes,
there's a,
that's another thing. Let me,
and I could be, I don't wanna
no, I'd like. it's a
rain on your
very-
presentation, but,
No, it's
and
a
I might
very
have
important
skipped,
thing,
I might have jumped the gun. You might have been getting to it.
I went back just out of my own curiosity, but everybody should be interested because this tells the story. Back in FY '12, we were only putting 19.3% to debt service. And Randy, you may remember, because you kind of worked on this with Frank Newdecker and myself, we at the time had set a limit of 23, I think it was, percent that could go to debt service, and you can see we were sailing right along in these years of only 19.3, 20%, 20.9, and then it started to grow as we borrowed more money, and it went up to 20.59 in FY '15, back down a little bit in FY '16 to 20.39. And then we had to, the council passed a resolution changing the rules, so to speak. Here's FY '16 and '17, still in the 20s. But in FY '18, we exceeded what Frank Newdecker and I had put together and we showed to S&P, which helped us to get our AA rating. And we had to up our topside limit to like 25%. And that's where we are today. Now, fortunately, this year, we're only looking at 23.5%. But I'll show you, capital-wise, what we're gonna have to look at in the future. And I would like to get one thing clear. Somehow in the mayoral campaigns, the word had gotten out, because I had been kind of in my face type situation, where people said the city had $100 million in debt. That is not true. We have 75 million as of the end of this year when we make our final payments, some of them in June. And if you want to add the interest, you can go up to 87. But I'll use an example. If you, let's say I buy a house for $200,000 and I put a $50,000 down, and then I go to buy a car. If somebody asks me, how much do you owe? How much are you in debt on your house? I would say 150,000, just the principal amount. If I'd go to my amortization schedule, I might see that I'm paying 300,000 for the 150,000 that I borrow. So I don't know where that number got spread around, but it is not 100,000, it's 75,000. When Mayor Gist took
Not
office.
100 million,
Million.
not 100 million.
Million, excuse me. I will get going sometimes. 75 million. When Mayor Gist took office, it was roughly 72 million, and it would be there today if we had not borrowed, if you recall, that 2.4 million for the industrial park out on Highway 223. So that's what brought it up to that level. And I mean, I can show you on page 97 in ATA's audit, last year they showed 79 million at the end of June of '18. We've paid down some. What Sam and I and Karen have tried to do is only borrow the amount that we're paying down. In other words, we're paying down roughly, as you can see, 9,700,000. And now here's where we're gonna hit some rough years for the next administration. It's up to 10 million for about 4 years. And then we drop off to basically nothing. We do have the opportunity to refinance some of these loans, specifically over here on the 2009, where we refunded some bonds that were going back into the early 2000s that built, going back further than that built City Hall, Ridgecrest Extended, the ballpark, et cetera. This is at about a 3.75% interest, which we could do better than that now. And if we go forward with that, we can probably save $1 million over this time period, because you can only refund every 10 years. So it's 2009. In March of this year, 2019, we could have opted to do that. We're leaving that for the new administration to take that under consideration. And then you can refund and push out some of these other loans. We've gone more recently to loans from the Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund, shown here in 13 and 15. And those are at a variable rate, what's called the SIFMA rate. And the SIFMA rate for about 3 or 4 years, as you know, when all the interest rates were down, was like 1.2 to 1.3. Now it's gone up into the 1.7, and then you add 1% for First Tennessee, who actually has these loans. And we're paying about 2.75% interest on these variable loans, which is still great. Now, the comptroller doesn't like you to have a complete, what would you call it, backlog of our portfolio of variable loans because of what could happen in the economy.
Al, didn't we, weren't some of these fixed rate loans variable at one time, and then they were changed to fixed rate?
No, these were straight out of the chute, so to speak.
Okay.
The only thing we did here was refund from the late 1990s. We refunded in 2009 and got a better rate, and now we could do that again.
When you say refund, you mean refinance?
Refinance, basically, yes.
Al, on that, the first one, one that got the $4 million principal each year,
Yes,
that we could refund that one?
yes.
Can we stretch the principal payments out if we did that, or are we limited to?
We would have to go to the comptroller, and we would have to give him some reasoning as to why we would want to do that. And of course, the reasoning would be that we've got kind of a rough 4 years here at 10 million, and it would be to our benefit to stretch that out. We could stretch it out no more. I believe Piper Jaffray, who you remember was in here as our financial advisor, no more than 2 years. But yes, we could also potentially do that. And that would be a benefit, because you can see the 4.7 million out of the 7.4 million principal, it's more than 50% of our principal in one loan. Because most of these other loans that we took out, you don't pay principal in the first year, the 2013, 2015. And these are, we can't use the term line of credit anymore. The comptroller frowns on that. But we didn't draw these total monies down until we needed them. We drew them down as they came due. So that's where we are on our debt. And before, and I know I promised Mr. Buchanan here, as we were talking before the meeting, well, first off, let me go into what I did, the assumptions I made, right, wrong, or indifferent. And the first thing I said, if you remember, was you'll notice on the budget ordinance, we only had a revenue increase of 0.12%, not even 1%. The main reason why is that West Tennessee Healthcare, when they acquired Tenova, they were able, by the terms of their charter, and I'm not that much of an expert on their charter, but their charter allows them, as a nonprofit owned by the city and county, to pull properties into their main campus, which now Tenova is part of their main campus. So that hit us to the tune of $300,000 and $92,000. In other words, Tenova was our third largest taxpayer, and that was just wiped off the books. And they were able to do that legally, nothing wrong with that. But then they also reached out and took off the books what they called their legacy properties. That's all the clinics that they have acquired over a period of time, like I go to the gastroenterology clinic. Well, when they purchased that facility and those services, that still remained on the books as a tax-paying liability, but they took that off also. So in total, they took away $812,000 worth of property tax. Now, each year since 1996, when Charlene Mercer, who was the head of the hospital board at that time, she made a motion on their books, their board, and it read something to the effect for both city and county, that they didn't call it a payment in lieu of tax, but it was a donation based upon the excess over their return on investment, which I don't know if that was, their target was 6%, but it was probably in that neighborhood. So in 1998, another board member upped that to the effect that it would be $200,000 minimum and $1 million maximum, based on, again, their excess over their return on investment goal. So for several years, back in the early 2000s, when I first got here in 2004, 2005, we received as much as $1 million. But ever since that area, starting probably in 2007, 2008, we've just received the $200,000. And that went to the Sportsplex because the council, and I don't know if any of you were here at that time, but I'll find the resolution. The council voted that any of the monies received from West Tennessee Healthcare on this donation would have to go to tourism projects. And if you remember, under Charlie Farmer, we only had one attempt at a tourism project, and that was a attempted zoo out on Airways. It failed, to put it point blank. So the Sportsplex became our only tourism project. So they have been getting the $200,000 for these years because they do draw in. We've had over 1.8 million people come through the gates since 2005. X% of those obviously came from out of town. Tournament we had about 3 weeks ago, there were 77 teams. 6 states were represented, also Middle Tennessee. Those people stay overnight. If you go out on a Saturday, you're going to see tons of boys and girls in uniform at pizza parlors and fast food places, etc. So what I had to do now was take that $200,000 away from the Sportsplex. They, West Tennessee Healthcare, said, okay, we hit you for $812,000. We're going to increase our new return on assets calculation by $500,000. Well, we already had $200,000, so we do get $700,000 now. And I would suggest, this is just my opinion, but to those of you who are remaining on the council, all we have from West Tennessee Healthcare, and Mayor, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the sheet of paper that you were presented by JR and Jeff Blankenship that showed this is what they plan to do. We have no written agreement, and we have no guarantee past the first year. So if I was part of the new administration, I would make it, and I've talked to John Newman in the county, he feels the same way. We need an agreement as to what the hospital is really going to do, because they have no obligation. They could just, in 2021, they could just say, we're not going to give you anything. And I'm not being critical of the hospital. I'm just telling you the facts, that they took away our number 3 taxpayer, and in fact, West Tennessee Healthcare was our number 2 taxpayer, right behind Kellogg's. So in my opinion, that would be one of the things on the to-do list. So those are the assumptions that I made in revenue. I did get the new assessment sheets from Francis Hunley's group. I did go through all the revenues and did my best that I could to determine what the building department, police department, all of the facilities, the civic center, Holman Arena, et cetera, would contribute. But it would have been better if we actually would have had their input. Okay, so we were stuck here, and with only a less than 1% increase in revenue, 0.12%. And then I came down and said, well, where can we expect some relief? So I looked at the general government expense that was budgeted in FY '19, and we no longer need some of these things. We paid off our Short Street building that we purchased for the police over here on Royal Street or behind. It's actually it's on Short Street, where the police store all their large vehicles and et cetera. It was a very good purchase for us, from the Richardson brothers. So we paid that off, and we won't have that this year. So I said, okay, that's a plus. Then we won't have an election next year, so there's another plus, 35,000. And we won't have reappraisal costs, which Francis Hunley, and rightfully so, hits us with every 4 years, because they do an appraisal every 4 years, and we and the county have to bear those costs. So I was able to pick up $1,045,000 there, but you gotta realize that's in a perfect world, saying nothing else is gonna change, go up or down. Then I looked at what needs to be done in our expense, and if you remember what Sam Dawson put before us, and this was something that we had to do for, again, the State Audit Department, the Comptroller's Department, and ATA, our auditors. And this is a resolution, budget amendment you passed that said, okay, we could go over budget as much as $914,000. But what you need to remember, this was just Sam and my best guess, and there will be many departments that will be under budget. So it's not that that's gonna happen totally. But two items that I knew we needed to address here were the stormwater and the ADA expense. On ADA, we are bound, that's the Americans for Disability Act, and there's a decree from 2015 that we signed under Federal Judge Breen, I forget which court it is, but it's a 20-year agreement, and we have to spend $500,000 a year in what's called curb cuts and other things, so that people on wheelchairs, like you might see out on Airways going to Rifa and other places, whenever we put in new sidewalks or repair sidewalks, we do these curb cuts that makes it wheelchair accessible. And we have not been spending enough money there. We only had $255,000 in the budget in FY '19, which is the current year we're in. So it's almost a no-brainer that I needed to increase that to $500,000. The other problem, which you know we've talked about in meeting after meeting, and it's been in the news, is our stormwater operations. Stormwater has, because of the attempt for us to help the citizens of our city and to prevent deterioration of our infrastructure, we've had to make major expenditures. Like one that I can just think of is out in front of Gold's Gym, where they had to replace the piping underneath that street there, which was, I believe, like $150,000, $200,000. So we've had to, or I took it upon myself to put another $314,000 in the budget for stormwater expense. But there may be others. I just cherry-picked the ones that I knew we had to do. And on the police department, they have what's called step increases. And we are bound by our agreements with the police department that they get step increases, all the patrolmen and whatever people qualify, in the gang, the drug force, et cetera. So I added in those numbers to come up with my best guess of the, in a perfect world, nothing else changing, this budget ordinance, which we originally started out with. So you can see that we're actually bringing down expense by 0.56%, but only able to increase revenue by 0.12%. But we're able to come out with a positive $506,000, again, in a perfect world, if I was fortunate enough with my crystal ball to cherry pick the right numbers. But
Council, essentially, what staff was going to present to you today would be a surplus of 1.3 million revenue over expenses. And we've taken 3 different areas here and bumped some of that surplus into those areas. Police department step increases, ADA, and stormwater. And that obviously cut that 1.3 million back to about $500,000 that we have revenue over expenses. But I want you to understand that initially it started at a point of 1.3 million. We decided to go ahead and insert some revenue into those 3 areas, which we certainly needed to do.
some other factors, and this leads up to the question that Harvey asked me and always asks. But also, I think it's good for you that are remaining on the council and the new council members, if there's any here, to look at one of our main sources of revenue. Property tax is about 33 million. The next major source would be sales tax. And here's where we are through 10 months. It's up 2.5% over, and this doesn't have anything to do with the schools. This is just what we normally would have gotten if it wasn't for the 2017 agreement with the county. But the sales tax in total has gone up 2.5%. Last year it went up 3.2. The year before that, 1.4. The year before that, 6%. The year before that, 3.7. Many factors go into that, the economy, that I can by no means address at this time. It's sort of above my pay grade to remember what happened to the national economy and our local economy during those time frames. Here's the important thing to remember. On borrowed funds, we borrowed $15.3 million in FY13, and it covered a 2-year period because we didn't borrow again until FY15 when we borrowed 17.4. And again, that was to cover us for 2 years. And if you divide that in half, you can see what Sam and I have tried to do is not borrow more over a year's period than we're paying down. So if we're paying down $9 million, we could potentially, for a 2-year stint, borrow $18 million. Our last borrowing was exactly $9 million on a fixed rate in FY19. And basically, those funds were borrowed, $3 million for the city court, $3.5 million for road construction, and the balance for other programs in police, fire, and other services that the city provides. So our debt service, and this was on the pie charts before, you can see, has grown from 6.3 million in FY12 up to the 9.7 million where we're at now, because you have to pay for what you borrow and expend. That's just part of what has to be done. A city of our size can't just pay for things out of the tax and payment in lieu of tax. Now, here's a couple other factors to keep in mind. FY14 We had a $600 bonus, which equates to $420,000. In FY15, we had a 3% increase, which amounted to $1,200,000. Then in FY16, we had another $800,000 Christmas bonus, and that amounted to $568,000. FY19, the year we're in now, and part of the reason why we're in a pinch is because we felt it was necessary to bring our employees up to levels of the county and other cities our size, Clarksville and et cetera. And we had a 4% increase, which amounted to $1,600,000. If I'm going too fast, stop me, but I'm trying to make this not a lengthy 3-hour, 4-hour budget hearing. Here's the fund balance that Councilman Buchanan so rightly asked about each time. Going back to FY11, there's 2 fund balances that we report. This is the one that Harvey's interested in. This is the unassigned. So we were up at one time to a $27.8 million total fund balance. But in there, and I would have to go back and look, there was a $3.5 million reserve for grants and a $1.2 million reserve for being self-insured. Those were things that ATA made us accrue for or assign, and I will go back if you request that, and try and get an explanation. I just couldn't recall off the top of my head. But we started out here with 19.7, 18.3, back up to 20 million, down to a respectable 18.9, 18 million. So you can see we haven't hurt our fund balance very much. But then we did come down to 14.7 million as the economy tapered off a little. And then we're back to 16.4, now 16.6. The other total will show 17.2 million, but there are reserves for minute things like midnight basketball, but just a mirage of things that we've made commitments on.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
if I may, Mr. LaFoon, so we're sitting in a fund balance around 17.2 or 17.5?
17.2 total, but the number that you always ask me about is how much of that is actually uncommitted,
Unrestricted.
unrestricted, and that's 16.6.
Okay. Let me say this with all due respect. I can remember when our fund balance was $4 million. I can remember when it was $23 million. Revenue increases our fund balance. You get revenue by growth and development, by establishing your community. You got to have revenue. With revenue comes debt if we're gonna grow this city.
That's right.
So I have no problem with that.
Now,
But
one of the main things.
we must remember that we don't wanna drain our fund balance. I would go out on a limb and say we have the biggest fund balance in any city, any government entity in this city.
In this city, or you mean?
City, county, Jackson,
Oh.
Madison County.
I don't know the exact numbers.
Well, I'll go out on a limb.
One thing, Harvey, that helped us back in the years that you were talking about, because we did get down as low as a $4 or $5
$4
million.
million.
But if you remember, we sold the landfill for 8.3 million. And we lived off of that
Yeah.
for many years.
Yep.
I still have 3.4 million of that invested in government bonds and things of that nature. But I wish we still had the full 8 million there. Excuse me. Wish I didn't get those calls wanting me to borrow more money.
As long as it's not the comptroller.
That's right.
This year, let's look at FY19. Where do we think we're gonna be? Sam and I talked about this yesterday. You have approved, you the council, and I'm not pointing the finger, but we have presented to you And you have approved budget amendments. In a perfect world, if everything else stayed the same, that has brought our number for this year as far as revenue and expense. Right now, if we close the books, we would be down 197,000. Now, you also have to look at the fact, one of the major uncontrollable contributors to our operations, if we were a company, you'd say our profit and loss, is our healthcare expense. And we have gone up as high as $8 million in claims. Right now, we're looking at about 7.6. And because we've had some good months here lately. But anytime that any member that's covered under our insurance plans has children or their own health expenses go out off the charts, so to speak, those are things we can't control. And I guess if I had to guess right now, everything considered, where we'll be for FY19, I would conservatively say we'll be down $500,000 because there are numerous expenses that we just can't control. And this year, we were hit with some major increases like I think it was $388,000 from Francis Hunley's group. I had budgeted a lesser amount, just didn't have the exact amount. The CRA that we fund, the TIF, I had budgeted $220,000 based on prior years, but everyone knows what's happening down here in the Atlanta area. Very good. It's increasing the price of the homes and bringing in tax revenue in that, but it also increases the 2011 agreement we have on the Atlanta CRA District 1 TIF, and that has gone up to $420,000. So there are some expenses that were for good purposes, but that are hitting us this year. That's about where I feel we would be conservatively, and there may be additional revenues come in. On property tax, we're $2.7 million ahead of where we were last year at this time on collections. And our delinquencies, which will end up transferring to Chancery, are right at $800,000, where this time last year they were at $1.2 million. So we're doing a much better job on collecting taxes, and we may have some uptick in other areas. The building department has done very well in their permits. A lot of people, not maybe so many new subdivisions started or anything, but people have done renovations to their homes, and we've had a lot of building out at the Columns area, things of that nature. So let me just open it to the floor for questions, otherwise we'll go back and take a look at the first item on our agenda, and that's passing the budget ordinance. Now, the other thing that I do need to say, we always look at the general fund as far as the ordinance, but it also includes the debt service and capital fund and all the drug funds and everything. The one thing who you 5 members who are gonna remain on the council is, we did not put in a capital budget. So the first week in July, whomever is here, whatever new administration is gonna have to, either at the first council meeting or at a special council meeting, is gonna have to have a resolution put before them authorizing us to borrow monies. Otherwise, police, fire, recreation, road resurfacing, just right on down the line, we do not have capital funds set up for next year.
So welcome aboard.
Yes. But that can be done fairly quickly if you pass a resolution, and then either we go with Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund on these loans that we do, which you can do very quickly, or we go out for bonds and to underwriters and see what kind of rates we can get there. That would take a little longer. But we're gonna have to get money from somewhere fairly quickly to get our capital projects going.
I'm sorry.
This is when we normally would be borrowing money for capital outlay, is it not?
Right.
Okay.
But we can't put together a capital budget that shows an increase until you have borrowed the money. In other words, you can't
Right,
appropriate it until you've got it.
right.
Is there anything we can do to help the future council be a step ahead on that?
Well,
Rather than coming up with the amount, obviously.
at the June 4th meeting, you could pass a resolution that wouldn't have any dollars associated with it. It could be worded just to say that the new administration could propose a borrowing. No dollars associated with it, but that would take one step away.
That'd put them a month ahead of the game then, as
Yes.
far as when they did need the money then.
Right.
But I would recommend we may consider doing that.
Well, that's kind of, Al, I guess, piggybacking off that, Randy, I know we're satisfying the state in kind of how we're doing this now, but thinking kind of going forward, I don't know, I've asked the question, you guys have answered, that the new council and mayor can amend the budget.
Definitely.
But does it make any sense at this point, in terms of, setting up the next council and mayor, to get the department heads involved and try to get as accurate of a budget as possible, even though it will probably get amended a little bit?
I would think that would be up to Mayor Gist and you, the council. You're the legislative body, he's the executive body. I'm just a reporter.
Because as it
Maybe
stands, I was just gonna say, I'm sorry, as it stands now, when we talk about departmental expenses, they have remained flat over the past budget year,
Right.
correct?
And some departments, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but let's just take purchasing. There's 2 people in purchasing. They're not gonna be increasing their budget very
Right.
much. They're very much controlled. But there are other departments who have hired people
Yeah,
or who have people who are up for longevity after you've been here 5 years, and they may not be significant increases. The 2 departments that we would have to look at the closest would be the police department and fire department.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say, yeah, police and fire, as we all know, come with amendments, I won't say every month, but often.
Well, in police, though, I will have to give Chief Weiser an accolade. Each year, he has come in really under. It may have been a revised budget, but he's come in under that. And in many cases, like when we had hail damage to his police cars, instead of buying new cars to have that hail damage covered, he's turned that money over to other people for capital.
Okay, my question is with the fire department. I know the police department, we've increased it, and I understand about that, the step increases. But we know the fire department needs some additional equipment, and they didn't have the money to get it this year. Now, new fire trucks, that's not considered capital outlay, is it?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So
$900,000.
even though they certainly don't have enough money in their budget for next year to get the equipment they need, you're saying that when we do allocate the capital
You had to appropriate it,
budget, that could be included in
you had to
that?
appropriate it then.
Yeah.
But those fire
Yeah.
engines have become very expensive.
Very
The-
expensive.
I know they have,
a
in the
quint,
millions, yeah.
as they call it, hook and ladder, I think, would be about 900,000.
Right.
It would be up to the council to decide
Right,
whether we need that or whether we need 900,000 on street
You can
resurfacing
call for the question.
or somewhere else.
Let me
well, it
ask you.
concerns me that we're not increasing their budget this year when they didn't have enough last year.
We ready?
Well, I think it'd probably be a real good educational session for the new council. Obviously, if you want to hear from the department heads, I think, again, we had a fair budget this year. That's when we went ahead and decided to move it into next year because it was fair and everybody seemed to have enough funding. But if the new council wishes to hear from the department heads, I think there'd be ample time to go ahead and have them come in and amend the budget at some point. It can be amended at any point during the year, really. It can be amended all at one time after you hear department heads and their and their request for this next year, or it can be amended, one step at a time. But I think it'd really be a really good educational process for the new council to hear, from the department heads, and that's one reason we decided not to do it this year, is the fact that, they did it last year. They were before us last year requesting the budget that we gave them. So,
Mr. Chairman, we're mandated by the controller of the state of Tennessee to pass this budget by
that's
June
right,
30th.
that's right.
I have one last question, if I may. This is relative to what our discussion is relative to the new administration and as we move forward. When we look at the stormwater expense, Al, and I know that when we look at our pie chart, capital expenditures are relatively for paving projects. Is there a way to move those stormwater expenses into our pie chart moving forward?
Well, again, it can be done by the council. When I stood up in front of you a year ago at this time, if you remember, we had a certified tax rate of $1.87. And we decided, and I proposed keeping it at $1.96. And I believe, under my auspices, we made a commitment to the citizens of Jackson that that money would be used for resurfacing. So if we're going to change and use it for something else, then that's going to have to come from the legislative body.
Okay, that was my question.
I can't do that on my own.
Right, that was my question.
Any other questions for Al?
There's a few items on the revenue, that are lower for changes that, are a little unusual, but rather than take the council's time up, I'll discuss that now at the fact, you know, to look at it for the next meeting and see some changes need to be made.
I'd be glad to do that, Randy. So I guess then, if there's no further questions, the item on the table right now is the approval of the proposed budget ordinance for 2020, and it would be a revenue of $74,329,000, an expense of $73,823,000, for a plus position of $506,000. And it has to be understood that the departments did not have input to the level that we would normally have.
So moved.
We have a motion, the second. Before we vote, this is ordinance on first reading. Need to have a public hearing and ask if there's anyone, I'll open the public hearing and ask if there's anyone here who'd like to speak in opposition to or in support of the passage of this ordinance. Hearing none, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Council, please vote.
And the motion passes with 7 members in favor, 2 against.
The next item, obviously, is maintaining the $1.96 tax rate. And we would need a vote, a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. This is also an ordinance on first reading. We'll have to public hearing, and we'll open the public hearing to see if there's anyone here who'd like to speak in support of or in opposition to the passage of this ordinance. Hearing none, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We have a motion and a second. Discussion with council. Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
Last question. I think, on the dollar amount, property tax. Property tax amount, if we approve that at the second reading, if the new council come back in and change that,
Yes, they could. They could change it before September when the state does their, State Board of Equalization does their calculations.
the other question is, do I need to make a motion about going forward with the capital outlay, or is that?
Is that through a resolution? Is that through a resolution for next meeting? Is that through a resolution for the next meeting?
Just put it on the agenda.
I think
Just put
we
it
can
on-
put it on the agenda.
Put it on the agenda.
Together, have it ready for us at the next.
Yeah, okay. Al, can you put the, How can
Yes.
you get the resolution together? We'll just go ahead and get it on the agenda and give you all the opportunity to vote on it,
Okay?
okay? Okay, with no dollars in the
No
resolution.
dollars, just the authority.
Okay, thank you, council. There being no
Is there a
further
second?
business, meeting is adjourned.
Say hey. Say hey.